What if I told you that the biggest reason your marketing isn't working isn't because of your offer or your price or even your pitch, but because you've fallen into what our guest today calls the existing marketing trap? Today, I'm thrilled to welcome a true pioneer in business strategy, Al Ramadan. Now, Al is the co-founder and CEO of Play Bigger. He's the co-author of one of my favorite books, Play Bigger: How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. And that's exactly what he's helped people do. He's a man who's helped create over $50 billion in market cap by guiding companies to stop competing and start category designing. Al's going to break down what it really means to design a category, not just compete for scraps in an existing market. Now, if you're an expert trying to stand out and build real authority in a crowded field, his advice will show why you don't want to be talking about being better, faster, or cheaper. That's doomed to failure. To win, you need to reframe the game entirely. If you've ever felt stuck, fighting for scraps in a saturated market, or struggled to explain what makes you different and worth that premium price, then this episode will flip your mindset about marketing. Get ready to think bigger, play bolder, and discover the power of being the first to name it, claim it, and own your category. Al, people have heard me talk about Play Bigger, category design, and the existing marketing trap, but I want them to hear it from you. How do you define this problem that you're looking to solve of the existing marketing trap?
Well, it's the idea that it's really hard to introduce new things into an old framework. And existing markets have a framework, usually with what we call the category king, and Play Bigger has already defined that market, defined the rules for it, and articulated the problem, talked about and set a blueprint for the solution. So when you enter one of those markets, you're really fighting for 24%, not 76%. And as we say in the existing market trap, there's 400,000 of the smartest people in the world trying to fit into 24%. Why would you do that? So that's really the core of the idea. And of course, category design itself is about creating and dominating new markets. That's the whole point. That's the discipline. That's what we believe is the value creation engine that has always been powering technology. And we think it's something that's more accessible. There is a discipline. There's a process you can go by. So the existing market names the problem, you being trapped in it, and category design is obviously a solution.
And you showed that, what was that, 8-10 years ago, that 76% of the financials go to the leader, the category king, and then everybody else fights over that other 24%. But it is so alluring to say, well, you don't understand. This is $1 billion market. All I need is a little portion of it, right? So why is that a trap?
It depends on what you're playing for. If you're playing for creation of wealth and value and market cap, then the smart money's on trying to be the category king and taking that 76%. I mean, that's where the value creation lies. And if you look at, I think when we did the study, the time to market cap study, which was back in 2015, now 10 years ago, I think we identified 35 category kings at that time. Many of them still exist today. And the compound growth rates, I'm talking about market cap growth rates for those companies, was in the 30 or 40% per annum. And so when you're on that kind of exponential growth, when you're creating that kind of value, you need to set the rules for the market, and that's what those category kings have done. It's not to say that a family business or a lifestyle business, they're not bad, okay? And there's sometimes an argument for, hey, I'm just going to take 5% of a giant marketplace. But the problem is you have to understand when you do that you're fitting into somebody else's rules, and that you're going to be playing the comparison game. I'm better, I'm faster, I'm cheaper, I'm whatever, right? And so that's really what we're saying with the existing market trap, is when you get trapped in one of those markets, and sometimes we do that and we don't even know we're doing it. But when you do that, there's a set of economics which don't work out as well.
even speaking as a small entrepreneur, right? I'm not going for an IPO, but as you say that, it's like, I don't want to compete with everybody else, because if you're saying I'm better, I'm cheaper, I'm faster, that's all synonyms for I'm the same. And, I can remember when I sold for Stryker, there was that whole thing of you will lose the business the same way you gained the business, right? So if you got that little family business or something like that, if I say, well, I'm just a little bit cheaper, I'm going to lose the business to the next person that's a little bit cheaper. Or even, for us, when we got podcast guests go on, and if they say something like, they name the category, right? I'm a full service digital marketing agency. That tells me nothing, right? It just doesn't differentiate you. It's just sort of, you get lost in the noise.
Yeah. And we believe you have to center on sort of a problem that's worthy of solving, right? And it could be the smallest problem in the world or the biggest problem in the world. Those are totally valid, either end of the spectrum. But unless you really focus on the problem you're solving, who you're solving it for, and understand the costs of that problem, then you just end up in this comparison game. And so category design and a lot of the work that we have in the existing market trap, in particular in chapter 2 and chapter 1, is really focused on exactly this issue. Get focused on the problem that you're solving and truly understand it better than anybody else. And if you can articulate the pain points and you can articulate the problem in a way that people sort of lean in, then that's what actually will create demand for your business. That will be actually what creates demand for your services and or product. And ultimately, you have a good chance of becoming the category king and taking most of the economics of that category, however small or big it is.
I remember years ago, a client told me, you guys are just like Preparation H. And at first I was like, excuse me, hemorrhoid cream? And he's like, no, it's a compliment, right? You understood my pain. You gave me fast relief, and you came recommended. I recommended other people. And it struck me, it's like, nobody cares about the product or service. They care about the pain in the rear end. But what about the people that say, I can cure this problem for everyone? And it's just so horizontal there.
Yeah, it's funny. In the existing market trap, there's a chapter we dedicate to the horizontal tool illusion, one of the 13 deadly sins that we identify in the book. And in fact, we use a case study there with Ryan Smith and Qualtrics. And it was exactly what you just said, Tom. It was this thing where, and in fact, first time I met Ryan, someone said that Qualtrics was like SurveyMonkey on steroids, or survey software on steroids. And he was like, that really pisses me off, right? I mean, it's this idea that someone's putting you in a bucket and then saying you're a little better or faster or whatever. That's not what we're about. The surveys could be applied to pretty much anything in business to measure something. And as we got going on the project with Ryan and his team, what we realized, that was the question we asked, was like, okay, what problem are you solving? And they're like, well, surveys measure something. They measure sentiment, human factors, whatever it might be. And we said, okay, well, what actually is it measuring? And it turns out that it's experience 80% of the time. The experience you have on an airline, the experience you have going to a doctor's, the experience you have, sort of with a promotion or something like that. And so as we went further into it, we realized actually the horizontal tool, surveys, were actually just a piece of a platform which needed to be much bigger. And we focused on, or we identified 4 of the sort of the core use cases for, experience management, which was the category that we created. And that was the customer experience, the employee experience, the product experience, and the brand experience. And so when we did that, and it took us a year or so to get the engineering organization and the product packaging sort of around that, where there's the platform called the survey, or the XM platform, it ended up being called. And then there were these 4 applications that you could buy. That's when Qualtrics really turned on and fundamentally changed the enterprise software world. It's now one of the top 5 things that you need. You need CRM, you need ARP, and you need XM. I mean, that's what people say now. Now, that was a real world example of going from a horizontal tool illusion where you're a Swiss Army knife, you can be applied to everything, to being super focused about one thing, which was measuring experience and making sure that the gap that exists between your perception of what that experience is and actually what's happening can be closed. And that's how the great companies do it. And I think it's chapter 4 of the Existing Market Trap speaks to that exact case study of going from a horizontal tool illusion to this more vertically oriented. And just one more thing, Tom. So when you do that, you move up in the value stack in the eyes of the customer. And one of the stories that Ryan tells, which we always used to laugh about, he used to walk in and say to the CEO, who usually had a great relationship with, hey, look, we've got this fantastic thing called Qualtrics, and it does market research and everything else. And he said it was the fastest trip to Betty in the basement ever, because the CEO would say, I love you, Ryan, that's fantastic, but like Betty's in charge of market research, go talk to her. Whereas when you walk into the CEO office and say, hey, listen, you probably don't realize this, but you think that you're delivering a great experience 80% of the time, your customers are actually saying 8. There's a giant gap between that, and you need to fix that otherwise someone's going to take those customers from you. CEO's like not sending you to Betty in the basement. He's like calling the exec team saying, get in my office right now kind of thing, right? It's a very different. And ultimately, the pricing and packaging side of that whole equation was that the survey software was being sold for round figures, $50,000, whereas the XM applications ended up being 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than that, in the millions. And so when you move up that mindset stack, as well as the sort of the value stack, that's when things really turn on, and they ultimately went public for $27 billion.
Yeah, and I love how you say it is what useful to everyone, essential to no one, right? And what you did there is you got to make it essential to the right people that value it, and that's how it goes up in the value.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. It's one size fits all, or modify Swiss Army knife. You can modify it for everybody. That's the trap there. And I fell in as an engineer. I've fallen into that trap before, and sort of saying, okay, I could adapt it for that one. I could adapt it for that one. And so you're not really clear on the problem you're solving. You're just using the tool to solve a whole bunch of different problems. That's the backwards way to do it. The way that creates the most value is to truly understand better than anybody else, in this particular case, measuring of experience, better than anybody else. And we actually went ahead and created a new set of data, which we called X data, experience data. It was being measured, and all of a sudden people realize, oh my gosh, that might be the most valuable piece of data in my enterprise, which it is. And so that's the discipline of category design. That's the discipline of getting super clear about what problem it is you solve, who has that problem, and what are the implications of not solving it.
You had to educate the market and come up with the language on that with everything, because if you would have just said, oh yeah, it's like a survey company, it's a Survey Monkey. If you let them put you in that box, you'll forever stay in that box. So it's going to take longer to start your own category than it is just to be in the box. How do you think about educating the market about that, to see the world in a different way?
That's kind of the entrepreneurial journey for a category designer. That's your job. Don't be confused. It's always been your job, by the way, before we even created the concept of category design, which was 10 years old now. People have been doing this for centuries. So this isn't like it's like management consulting essentially got, born in the 1920s, I think it was. Maybe it was a couple years before that. And now all of a sudden it's a necessarily, quote, discipline inside enterprise. It's the same thing with category design. It was invented in 2015, but people have been doing it for a long time. And the great entrepreneurs are the ones that evangelize a problem and make the pain points so real and emotional for you that you lean in and say, I have that problem. Sometimes you don't know you've got the problem. Sometimes you don't think it can be solved. I was telling a story yesterday that I remember the moment that I pushed a button on my iPhone, I think it was 2009 or 2010, something like that, and a black Uber showed up. I never believed for 1 second that problem could be solved. I always believed that I had to call some person and talk to them in dispatch and say, hey, can you come get me? And they would be on the phone, not answering the phone, whatever it might be, and I'm standing there in the rain, right? And so that's the challenge with categories is most of the effort at that time was in dispatch software and speeding up the response times of the calls and all of that sort of stuff. But what the founders of Uber realized was, well, wait a sec, there's this new thing, it's called a smartphone. And if we have an app on that thing, it's got a GPS, and I just push a button, it knows where I am. I can do the routing for, like, why don't we even do? And so they changed the way we thought about getting a taxi or getting a ride. And that became a new category called rideshare, of course. And Uber now is, a giant company, and so is Lyft and some of their competitors, right? And that is the journey. That's the entrepreneurial journey that you have to go through. They were tackling a different problem. They weren't tackling about how efficient is the call center or how efficient is the dispatch. They were saying, what was the experience for the end user, and how do we change that?
You said that great entrepreneurs do this, and they always have done this. Do you think that applies to the big E entrepreneurs, Uber, Netscape, all the rest, and to the small E entrepreneurs also?
I do. There's a story in Play Bigger about a guy called Clarence Birdseye. I don't know if you remember that story in the book, but Clarence was into agriculture, and he studied some of the movements of the tribes in Canada, and he realized that they would go fishing, they would pull the fish out of the water and drop it on the ice, and it would, quote, flash freeze. And his question was, oh my gosh, wait a sec, if they can do that for fish, because they'd have stacks of them that are available all summer, we could do that for other products. And so he created a very small vegetable company, which was Birdseye, and that established this whole category called frozen foods. And you and I walk into Whole Foods or whatever market we go to now, and there's a whole aisle or two or three of frozen foods, some of which are related to vegetables, some of them are pizzas, some of them are ice cream, like whatever. And so that's typically what happens, right? Is that a small entrepreneur in this particular case understood the pain, which was you couldn't get fresh food unless you lived within 2 miles of a farm. This is before, planes, trains, automobiles, right? And so that was a real problem for people, nutritionally, psychologically, just from a point of view of eating food and enjoying it. And so once he had unlocked that, then others started their own verticals, whether it's pizza, whether it was ice cream, or whether it was whatever else. And all of a sudden now you have this massive industry around this concept called frozen foods.
Do you think the first person to come there has to market differently because they've got to communicate what it is? Is there that burden on the category king, or maybe even the first mover there, to explain it to the world?
Yeah, your job's to explain that there's a problem and that you have a pain point that's really costly or valuable. That's your job. And that's what Clarence did. And Clarence back in the day, Clarence was running ads that had pictures of at the time, housewives preparing dinner with essentially fresh vegetables every day. And he said that, and he made the case that it doesn't have to be a can of yuck, I think is the language that he used, right? And you can have fresh, you can have the new vitamins, you can have all of that stuff, right? And so that was his attempt to talk to the pain point, and the cost of it, the health costs of this, right? That was, and that is the burden of the category designer, the entrepreneur who's evangelizing this problem. And then, of course, once you do that, and once you establish that you're the expert in this, everyone assumes you have the problem. It's just psychology. It's you go to a doctor and you start asking questions, and she says, does it hurt when you do this? No. What about that? That really hurts. She's asked 3 or 4 questions, you immediately assume she has an answer. It's just human psychology. And so the one that wins the framing of the problem then goes on to name it and then claim it in the sense of the category that's being defined.
even the language that you use there, I'm thinking, if they give a 10% off coupon, it's meaningless because I don't know what it is. But once you say can of yuck, you've just put it there, right? They will never see it the same way again. You've changed their entire viewpoint on that.
Yeah. The Uber ads, of course, were a person standing in the rain in New York on a phone, waiting, calling the cab dispatch person, saying, "Hey, look, can I get a cab on 24th? Blah blah yada yada." You immediately related to that problem. There wasn't any confusion about that. It was like, no, I have been there, I have experienced that. It sucks, and then they just say, "Just push this button." It's like that you just assume that that's going to work, and of course it did. The black, like I said, in what was it, 2010, I think it was, the black cab just showed up, and I got into it, and it's like, this is a miracle. And from that point, I don't think I've ever used a taxi since. And so that's the onus is on that entrepreneur, and too many entrepreneurs think that the way you win is by comparing yourself to somebody else and to explaining why you're better or faster or cheaper. We see it all the time. And, positioning itself, something that we talk about in the existing market trap, and we kind of expose it for what it really is, which is positioning, by definition, is your position in an existing market. By definition, when you do positioning, you trap yourself. It's not a good idea, right? You have to do something different. And that's the whole point of the existing market trap book.
Yeah. And we're both old enough to remember some of the things that came around, Y2K. I was watching a series recently on the BlackBerry, and they're showing the prototype, and the investors look at it and say, that is the biggest phone I have ever seen, right? That's the biggest phone on the market. And the inventor looked at him and said, it's not a phone. That's the smallest mobile computer you've ever seen. And they were just like, wow, you just reframed it. And now everything else was a useless phone. This was a mobile computer.
Yeah, no, that's right. And there were products before that, but they were for sure. BlackBerry were one of the Research in Motion. The company was one of the real innovators in that whole smartphone space. And I think the story of the smartphone itself is such a exciting case study in category design and product design, and the combination of those two things. I remember seeing way back the Nokia communicator. It was probably about as big as this, had almost a full keyboard on it. And it was this idea that you could do exactly what you just said, which is mobile messaging, and you could actually, it was basically a mobile computer. And I was sitting with Anssi Van Jockey, who is one of the leaders of Nokia, incredibly bright man, and had a vision for mobile computing. And maybe 2 months before, I was with Adobe, and we had pre-release or preview of the iPhone. This is the original iPhone. And one of the biggest regrets I have in our career was we didn't find a way to get our technology, which was this thing called Flash from Adobe, on the iPhone. We couldn't get it there in time. They needed it done in a month, and we couldn't get it done in a month. So anyhow, that's the backstory. I remember sitting with Anssi and saying, "Oh, hey, like I saw this thing called the iPhone. Have you heard about it?" And he says, "Yeah, we've heard about it." And he sort of said, "Ho. They think they're going to sell 1 million of those in a year." He said, "We sell 3 million a day." And so there was just this a moment. I remembered those comments at the time. I remember those comments. It was not because he's not an intelligent guy. He's brilliant. But it was, the framing was wrong, right? They were selling what they called in those days handsets. They were flip phones. They were really small. You might be able to text on them if you could figure out how to use the numbers key and all that sort of stuff, and Apple were doing something very different. Their belief was, at the time, we want the web experience to be on a handset or on a mobile phone or on what they ended up calling a smartphone. That was where they were starting from, the web experience. was really focused, really specific. At the time, they didn't have applications. So if you may not remember this, but there was no third-party applications. There was like 12, I think, on the homepage. That was it. There wasn't, you can't go to a store or anything like that. And so that case study right there is they being Apple, got super clear about the problem, which is you're not at your desk, you want to do some work. The web's already on fire. This is 2007. I mean, the World Wide Web started in 1995, so 12 years later. And no one had solved that problem. BlackBerry had done a fantastic job of email, and a lot of people still like the sensory touch of the keyboard sort of thing. I know a lot of people who still miss that with the touchscreen. But they solved a different problem, which was this access to the internet while you're away, and mail and text and everything else, of course. And they also immediately realized, oh my gosh, this thing called apps needs to be opened up, and there needs to be a third-party ecosystem. It's part of category design, is how do you actually provide for all of the use cases on your platform? We call it an app form strategy. There was 12 or 15 of them that Apple really cared about, and then the rest, they needed millions of other developers to do that. And so, perfect example of how being super focused about what the use case was and what the problem you were truly trying to solve, and now the rest is history. It's a multi-trillion-dollar market, right?
Yeah, and it's like at the beginning there, I think you talk about going after, zero billion markets, right? And at that point, how do you value something like that? But you just know if you build the market, it'll be incredibly valuable, and you can set the rules for it. It's like also, I think of the days where we used to count minutes, right? How many minutes is this going to use on the phone? And all of a sudden they were able to flip it from, it's not minutes anymore, it's data. And they just changed the entire economics of the market.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And these 0 billion or $0 trillion markets are the ones that are most interesting to investors. VCs are always looking for these $0 billion market opportunities. And that's one of the things that some of the many founders sort of, again, fall into the trap of. They say, there's a giant TAM already established. It's $20 billion. There's 5 companies, and these are the customer sets and whatever it might be. And it's this level of comfort. It's sort of, existing markets are super seductive, right? They've got size, they've got scope, they've got definition, they've got all of these things. And so it's like, I feel comfy here competing for my little corner. Most investors don't like that. The really great investors are looking for the 0 market caps from the start. And that's when the opportunity truly arises. So $0 billion and $0 trillion markets are exactly that example. The smartphone and the iPhone in particular is the classic sort of use case or example of a $0 trillion market.
And I would even look at it from a little E entrepreneur standpoint, right? If we've got 2 Italian restaurants in town, right? You've already proven that there's a market for it, right? But so it's safe to come in there and actually build right next to them. Well, maybe the market can only support 2 profitably. So you're going up against the 2 that already have an existing base there. But people will say, well, that's safe, right? I've told you the story when I first started out here, and Christopher said, well, why don't you claim that this is a new category of podcast interview marketing? And it's like, because people know what PR is. They know what marketing is. I'll just sort of say it's the conversions of that. And that wouldn't have been fun. And it would have been always fighting after, we're just like them, right? And it would have been a fighting for crumbs as opposed to evangelizing. And honestly, it's a whole lot more fun. It's something to talk about as opposed to just hoping somebody finds you because you're cheaper, you're faster, whatever the is.
Yeah. And it comes back to this definition of scope and problem and focus. And I was in Italy. I just spent 6 weeks in Italy living there in a place called Riva del Garda. And the restaurants over there don't call themselves Italian restaurants. They call themselves, Agricur, turismo restaurants, which is one class, which is, we grow the food on the farm, you have it that day, it doesn't come from anywhere else. That's one example. There's another ones which we specialize in homemade pasta. There's another one that we've got the best, we focus on sort of meats and spec and all that kind of stuff. And so when you get clear about what it is you're actually trying to solve for. So in the agriturismo case, it's like those people who truly want to support farm to table in a way that, is off the charts. That's where you go, right? And so your example of the Italian, in Chicago, you don't have to be an Italian restaurant. You can be something else, and you can specialize something that clearly is Italian food, yes, but it's focusing on something different, and that's the whole opportunity for entrepreneurs, is to get super clear on that.
So, Al, I appreciate everything you do as you're talking to people here, right? And what's the word of wisdom that you would give them? Especially these are people that are trying to get their message out. They're trying to connect with their ideal clients and the AI that's referring them. They're trying to evangelize their category on podcast interviews. What words of wisdom would you have for them?
Don't be a solution looking for a problem. Talk about the problem, because that's at the core of what humans react to. Make it real, make it emotional, and make it, accessible for people to connect to. And then once you've done that, the solution just shows up as the obvious answer. Most entrepreneurs do the opposite. We got a carbidingulator. It runs faster. It runs cheaper. It runs smoother than everybody else. We're going to give you a 20% discount, blah, blah, yada, yada. That's just all noise that goes past us all. We get 5,000 messages a day in marketing today. And you can't have time to process each one of those. The only ones that stick are the ones that actually are emotional, the ones that connect with a problem you're feeling today.
Al, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And how can people connect with you, find out more about you? Where do they go for more of Al's wisdom?
Playbigger.com is a good place to start. We've been doing this for about 15 years now. Christopher and I started it 15 years ago. And so playbigger.com is a good place to start. There's two books that we have, Play Bigger, the book, and the existing Market Trap, the primer. Both are available on Amazon. Feel free to buy them, or the audiobooks, or the downloadable versions. And then if you want to get in touch with any of us, Mary at playbigger.com always knows where we are, knows how to track us down. So send her an email.
Highly recommend checking out the site. Definitely read and study the books, right? And then implement on those. Al, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great talking with you, Tom. And, any friend of yours is a friend of ours. Have them call us. We'll be happy to help out in any way we can.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Wow. What an insightful conversation with Al Ramadan. If you've ever felt like you're just another option in the market, then today's episode made one thing clear. You don't have to play by someone else's rules, especially today in an AI world. Al showed us that the most successful entrepreneurs don't compete on features and price or even branding. They win by evangelizing a new problem and designing a category around the solution only they can offer. Here's your actionable takeaway. Stop pitching your solution. Start talking about the problem you solve. Get crystal clear on the pain that your ideal client feels. You should name it, frame it, and own it. Share that unique point of view that will reframe how your ideal client forever sees the world. And as you're using podcast interviews to build your business, for the love of God, stop talking about your story and your solution. Speak about the problem you see and why you can show them the solution. It's not an alternative, but a new path entirely. If this episode sparked something in you, I'd encourage you to dive deeper into Al's work over at playbigger.com and check out the existing Marketing Trap. As always, if you want help evangelizing your category on targeted podcast interviews, check out Interview Valet. Until next time, stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever.